Good morning, guys. This is Stephen Khuong here with Natalise and Jess Furman. Welcome to episode 5 of The Unlikely Journey. We have some really good topics to talk about this morning. I'm going to let my great friend Natalise take the lead.
Yeah. So this weekend, I was talking with my husband, Shane, and we were just talking about, pivots in our lives and the career choices we've made. And I'm so curious to hear about how you guys have thought about the decisions you've made. Like Steve, you founded Curacubby. What motivated you to do that, to pivot from, you had a fitness business before and sold that. And Jess, you work at a label now. Why that label, or why label at all? Would just love to hear your motivations.
Well, that's a great question. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was become this world famous DJ producer. So, not in a million years that I think I would be in the software industry. For Curacubby in particular, that came about out of necessity. So, a little bit about my background. I have a son with autism, and it was really early on in his life where we decided that the education environment in our local community wasn't appropriate for him. So we, along with a number of other families in the local area, started a small preschool with just 4 families out of a room in a church. And as we were trying to build that organization, we learned that the operational inefficiencies associated with education organizations were a widespread problem. It wasn't just isolated to us. So as we were thinking about how we can help grow the school, we were looking at software products, and we realized that for the most part, cutting edge software businesses were not necessarily paying the same amount of attention to the school vertical as they do with other industries. So we thought that it was a need of ours to really build something to help with the school. We built the product, and other local schools heard about it and wanted to beta test the product. Over a period of a year, we had gotten enough interest where we thought that this could be something that can help other schools and then in turn help other children and families as well. So it was more of a mission driven thing in the very beginning. We didn't really think about this as a commercial endeavor. But as we began to dig a little bit deeper, we've realized that there was actually a lot of pain points that organizations, particularly in the educational space, experience, specifically with payment processing and workflow. From there, we were fortunate enough to get accepted into an accelerator, and fast forward 5 years, here we are. So the short answer is that it was done out of necessity. So
Yeah.
that's like the story of Curacubby. Jess, I think your route is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting question to think about. Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily a necessity. I had just started and launched my own production company in Custom House, and I'd gotten to a point where I was talking to a couple different investors, and I had just launched a small label off of my own Custom House, and I was just hitting that like growth point, pain point where I was having to invest money to get to the new level with like different staff, staffing and just I just you expand more, you spend more money, and I was fronting and covering the cost for the company myself independently. And around the time that a couple of investors circled, one of them actually, instead of investing, said he wanted to put me in touch with friends of his that were starting a record label group, more of a music group. There's a publishing company and a few sub labels, and he asked if I would talk to them. He said, I know you're not really looking for a job, but would you talk to them? And I kind of ended up, in the position I'm in right now, which I love, for a number of reasons. Because of that conversation, when they approached me, they wanted to hire a licensing person at kind of a lower mid level that would just pitch their music. And I kind of had a larger level conversation with them about where I saw the industry going in terms of licensing and custom music, and how I've built on my own company and how I thought that it would work and be more profitable. And they called me back the next day and said, we hadn't thought about it that way. What will it take for us to get you on board with us? So they made me a really attractive offer that I kind of couldn't say no to, which basically is that I got to build their division from scratch, which I love doing. I love building things. But I also got to maintain and keep ownership over Sound Revolver, and we white labeled it with the group. So they benefited by me coming on board with a full, I had like a sync roster. I also had a client Rolodex I was generating with my own company, Sound Revolver. And the deal I have with them is while I'm part of the Big Noise Music Group, Sound Revolver is under that music group, but I still retain ownership if I leave. My custom house goes with me. So it was a really interesting kind of arrangement that enabled me to have like the best of both worlds, where I have a salary and I have a budget and support for a team and a bit of an infrastructure, but I really get to continue to build out a company and have the challenge of building out a whole division for them, which has been really challenging. And at this point, by year 2.5, 3, it's running pretty smoothly, which is cool to see.
That's awesome. Natalise, what about you? I've known you for a long time, and my God, you've done a little bit of everything. But really, in particular, tell us about your transition from the music industry into consumer healthcare products.
Well, I think for me, I had a bit of um, a not purgatory in a bad way, but just sort of like sort of a bridge, I guess. And that was business school, right? So when I left the music industry, in some ways it was like a hiatus because I went to business school. And during that time, it was like I really dug deep and thought about, what do I want to do in the world? How do I want to make an impact? And, consumer health and wellness is something that I've been just really passionate about. I'm just passionate about wellness in general and care, self care, and health, of course. And they're all related. And so when I got out, I actually joined a consumer pet tech company, but it was like wellness for pets. And I love animals as well. So that was sort of that kicked off my journey, and then kind of, moved around from there. And, but, I think something that I've thought about and I'd be curious to hear from you guys is like, you don't make a choice without giving up something, and it's not that it's a bad thing. And I'm not trying to be negative at all, but I think that, there's always like a balance. And you make a choice because you know that, or you believe that the pros outweigh the cons, but there is something that you're giving up. So it's like, you know, and maybe I'm being presumptuous here, but
No, I love
you know,
this. I love it. I love this
Yeah, I
topic.
think you're right. I think you're all right. I think you like when you pivot, you're like, I mean, inherent in the concept of pivoting is essentially that the track you're on, for whatever reason, ideally it's in your own control and your own pivot and choice, or, you're kind of thrust into a situation where you have to make a decision, but you're right, you're derailing and you're shifting. Um, yeah, I think, I mean, I was interesting to think about what I gave up with Big Noise. I guess I didn't feel like I was giving up very much because one of the things that was really important to me was that I was able to still write on a bunch of the projects and work on creative. And, I was able to ask for the things that I wanted. And I had leveraged myself into a position where they saw the value in me, in terms of helping them set up what they wanted, what their vision was for having a robust sync licensing division. They didn't just want to have, if you go on the website, it's not just, I mean, they promote the publishing side, the record label side, but sync is just as prominent. I lucked out because this was something that they really believed in having, as a big part of their model for their music group. And because of my success, I had a lot of leverage. So I was able to ask for a lot of the things that I wanted, which one of them was, that I'm not just popped into an executive camp. I'm still continuing to write on my projects that come in. I didn't, I wasn't one of those people that was struggling as a creative and then, turned and got a day job. Like I was actually thriving as a creative in my own company. So I would say the biggest thing I gave up was building my own company as aggressively as I had before, because at this point I don't have equity in the music group. So, a lot of my effort and time building up their brand and building up, I'm not, as I'm landing these gigs for them, I'm not I don't have equity in the company, so I'm not essentially building up my own company. So the sacrifice for me has been the time, but the ability to have my brand, to me felt like it was a good mitigating factor where I wasn't entirely abandoning something that I'd grown. I was lending it to them, but I was still able to maintain an active profile. The custom stuff all does go through Sound Revolver. We build through Big Noise, but I still have a brand that I'm not losing entire momentum for. But yes, my focus, I would say what I gave up as my focus at this point is the priority is the music group and hitting our targets. So it's not necessarily just me 100% focusing on building my own business that I own for myself.
I really love this question. Oftentimes when we think about giving up something, we tend to think about things like time or something that's related to a monetary value. But for me, I think in order to start Cubby, I really had to give up my previous identity because I had spent the past, 15 years building up this brand that was fitness related. My name was synonymous with that brand. We've trained, hundreds, if not thousands of people, got them certified, kettlebell fitness, kettlebell sport. We had built a brand, a product brand around kettlebells. We had built a really strong local community brand for the gym business as well. So it was difficult to leave that because I had built so much of my confidence, my security, and in a sense, my inner self-worth. Yeah, Natalise, you're right. It's very difficult to be great at, many things at the same time. But it's not impossible, but it's difficult. So, for me, it was like, gosh, it was uncomfortable to like all of a sudden leave the realm of, being this fitness personality and moving into the startup world, which is, it's a lot different, right? The language is different,
Yeah.
your network is different. I will say this, something that I learned from bootstrapping many businesses in the past is that you never truly leave things behind. I think what you do is you end up changing your perspective on what you actually do. But for the most part, there are residuals, like residual ROI that you get from each business. So what I mean by that is, for example, Cubby. My co-founders are actually clients of mine from the fitness business,
Wow, that's cool.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And a number of investors that came on early into Cubby were also somehow a first or second degree connection to the gym business. So I think that, when we think about, closing one door and opening another door, oftentimes we can think about closing one door as like leaving something behind perpetually or permanently. But I don't think that's the case. I think when you close one door, it simply means that, you know, some relationships are left behind that door, but before you actually lock that door, some of those relationships actually come with you into the new door that you're opening.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so for me, it was more of an identity thing that was the hardest part, but time and money and all that stuff, it's those things I think you can recapture a little bit less stress, but yeah, the identity thing was hard for me, but yeah. But what about you, Annalise?
Yeah, I mean the identity thing for sure resonates. I mean, I think when I went to business school, it was like I didn't define myself as an artist completely. Like, it was like that wasn't 100% of my identity. Not that it ever should have been anyway. But yeah, but certainly it when I left business school, I tried to take some of the things that, like, what are all the things that I love about being an artist? It's like, okay, I get to be creative. I get to express myself. There's a lot of emotion that I'm always feeling, which is good. I mean, I like it. Like I love living there, if that makes sense. And, in sort of the corporate world, you don't get that as much. And so how can I take some of those elements and infuse it in my daily life or practice or work even. And I think it's still a work in progress, but I think it's been something that has been top of mind in terms of creating a career that is meaningful to me, but also satisfies me. And and then, what can I do in this sort of chapter in my life to like let go of the things that didn't serve me in that last chapter. So anyway, it's been sort of something that I've thought about.
Do you guys have any regrets?
I mean, I don't necessarily fundamentally have regrets. I just feel like I just try to learn from different things, and like hindsight, right? It's like, why am I judging myself based on how much more experience I have now to maybe break that down a little bit differently, or not being in that specific situation. Yeah, I don't particularly think I have any regrets. I think I've had a couple knocks, but like turned them around pretty well. And um, I think at every instance, I made the best choice. I feel like I made the best choice I could, given the information I had and where my ambitions were. I guess I'm thinking initially of a time when I had a company, before I went on tour again, and I had a bunch of clients and retainers. And I'm like, would that have been a regret that I like gave all the money, the business and the money to my business partner at the time, and just decided to go on tour again? Um, but no, that was the choice I had to make at that time. There wasn't another option. That was the best choice for me, given what I was interested in doing. I don't know, Natalise, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I try to have sort of that same philosophy where, it's kind of a waste of time, I guess, to regret anything or to see it that way, because it's all in the framing, right? Like, you can regret or not regret. You can take it as sort of like a learning experience. But I guess the way that I would think about it is, if I knew what I know now, would I do anything differently? And, I think I've said this before in an earlier episode, but I think I would try to put my stake in the ground and be more confident about that stake in the ground, because I think I have been very mindful, or in a bad way, of like pleasing other people, and just sort of being unsure of myself and sort of being swayed. And so I think, not that I regret it, but I would have encouraged, if I could go back in time, I would encourage my younger self to just be confident in like the intuition that I had at the time.
Did you have any people to serve as your sounding board, like say a mentor or like a business partner or co-founder, like during those moments where you're just not sure and you're feeling like you're being swayed?
Not not really. Like, not for me. I mean, like, I grew up in a family, like no one was in the entertainment industry. My parents are immigrants. They're entrepreneurs, of course, now. And you know and certainly I talked to my mom, who is an entrepreneur in her own right. But she's street smart, you know what I mean? But she doesn't know necessarily like the industry. And so it was hard
Right.
to really get kind of clear advice per se. And I think that my issue was some of the, unfortunately, the challenges that I had were with my own management, which is a whole different story. But, so it's like, if there was no really sort of like outside mentor that I could go to that could say, you should do this or you shouldn't do this. And so I think that was hard.
I can really empathize with that. Often when I think about things that I regret, there are not a lot that I am regretful about, but perhaps the one thing that I am most regretful about is not having found a mentor earlier on. I was really arrogant when I was younger and just thought that I knew everything and just thought that, everything could be solved by the act of just grinding and using grit and working hard. Now in hindsight, I have a mentor now. I've had one for the past 5 years. In hindsight, I can really see how having a mentor advisor earlier on can really change the the trajectory of growth, positive growth, for anyone that's doing entrepreneurial stuff. Jess, I'm wondering about you. Did you have any sort of a mentor as you were coming up?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I was just thinking a lot about like what Natalie said about the stake in the ground thing, and I mean, I'm like, I think I mentioned in one of the other podcasts, like I found people who were smarter than me in every class if I was struggling or when I was struggling, or even if I wasn't, and I would make friends with them and do study groups. Like I've always been really, I've always like sought knowledge. I don't know if I've necessarily had one mentor. I feel like I've worn so many hats that I have people who I appreciate uh, advice from in different lanes, but I don't think that I've ever found someone that covers the gamut for me in terms of my aspirations in business and, like when I was doing political theory and essay writing and, research. Like I feel like I've found pockets of people that I admire and I reach out to, um but yeah, I don't necessarily, for me, it really hasn't been, I don't have one mentor. I would say I'm just pretty good at finding people who I admire and asking them questions, in those lanes. But yeah, I think, the stake in the ground thing, I want to go back to because I do feel like, um, and that is, I don't know if you felt this way, but coming from a creative background, I feel like um, I had to be over prepared. Like I think now that I'm running the things that I'm running and I'm getting involved, and I've been consulting on and off for years before I got involved with Big Noise. People had, like, with their startups and their businesses, and I made a whole business out of that, around my touring. I feel like, the confidence part, like I feel like I always thought there were adults. It's like thinking they're adults, and then you become an adult and you're like, wow, we're all the people who are running the planet. That's terrifying. Like there's this myth of adulthood.
Yeah.
And I think like the stake in the ground thing that I really relate to is like I've always had confidence in myself, but I don't know, again, if this is a woman thing on top of, a gender issue on top of other things, but, I didn't come from a family of intellectuals necessarily or big business people. My mom was a teacher. My dad, was a blue collar worker that ended up getting a degree to be a civil engineer, and he was a suit. But I don't know. I always felt like, and sometimes I still feel like I'm knocking on the door from the outside, and I'm the kid with the big backpack and all the books trying to trying to figure it out. And I guess looking back in hindsight, I think I've over prepared myself in a lot of instances where people who hadn't done as much prep work but just had more confidence probably got ahead a little bit faster.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the gender thing because I was thinking about as you were talking and how you said you've never had really a mentor, and I in some ways I felt the same until I got to business school and so started stalking all my professors, like and sort of seeking guidance from them. You know, one of my first experiences like in the corporate world was like, there was a woman who was on a board of the company. And I thought in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, this is so cool. Like she can be a mentor or I can, get some guidance from her. A few months later, I found out she essentially tried to get me fired, like in some ways. And I felt so, it was like sort of out of nowhere. And I felt so betrayed by that like experience. And I thought, is this a gender thing or is this like not a gender? And I don't want to think about it that way. But what it has done, it has made me more motivated to mentor others if they're seeking it, especially young women, because I think that, if gender was at play at all, like I want to be part of the solution. So anyway, that's something that I wonder about.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting that that narrative was occurring in your head. I'm curious, Jess, the role, the position, the responsibilities that you have within your company, your label. You are in a position of making a lot of decisions. And speaking of gender, give us a little bit of a survey in the industry. Are there many women that are in similar positions? I'm just curious.
There aren't actually. There was a study done, by the Annenberg Foundation a couple years ago that found that less than 1% of women were represented in both creative, like in the music industry from various sides. So, the top earners based on, who's charting, the songwriters, the producers at the top, like there's just it's 1%. It's 1% representation. I will say in the last couple years, I've seen women in music groups. I belong to a bunch of them. I have seen this turning of the tide, and I relate to what Natalise is experiencing, because I do think that there's an older guard, and again, I'm not making an assumption about how old this person was on this board, that Natalie's might have picked up on that, but there's a little bit of a generational gap. I think that women did have to fight so hard to get to these positions that there was a little bit of a pay it forward mentality in terms of not making it easier potentially for other women. And I do think you see that a lot with people who experience, I see it, even, it's not even a gender specific thing, but I see it in the music industry where, you have these big producers that get to be really big, forget what gender they are, race, but then they pay it forward by, having slave interns that ghost for them. And they feel like it's just a pay it forward mentality. I paid my dues, you're going to pay yours. I think what I've experienced is, there are tides that seem to be turning, whether or not and maybe Natalie's back me up on this. If it's a hot button issue, like I keep getting hired to do things because I'm LGBTQ and I'm a female producer. And, I would love to think that this is leveling a playing field and it's not just necessarily performative with regards to these larger corporations and industry trying to check those boxes and go, look, we're on deck too. We hired, just to do these projects.
Yeah.
Because ideally I want to be hired because I'm the best, right? I want
Yeah.
them to look at a group of people and go, Jess is the right person for this job, not Jess is LGBTQ and she's also a woman, so let's put her in this space. So I'll ride it. I will ride it to see if we can get people in the right positions and be able to say, look, now that these people are here, like, check it out. Like, they are, they are just as good. It's not, like kind of, I do think it'll level things off, but yeah, I mean, look, I try to pay it forward. I make sure I look around the room, and if I notice that I'm hiring a lot of men or a certain race, I try to just take a step back and say, okay, how do I make this a little more equitable? The goal isn't to dip any type of quality, right? It's to see where maybe access points aren't allowing the candidacy for specific creative jobs, whether for me it's hiring composers or producers, or just even my staff, like, yeah, where are these access points denying me a pool of people that's a little more diverse?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. And I think also it's almost like it should really just be like let me check my own unconscious bias and let me check it. And then still, it's like you said, you're not going to dip on quality. But it's a hard problem to fix.
Now, Natalise, what's your experience been on the fundraising side? Speaking of gender and equality.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think the stats say that 2% of founders who raise money are actually successful in raising money. 2% are Asian women, and so I know that going in, but certainly I don't think about it on a when I have meetings or anything. And that's the thing, I'll never know if I'll never know if I if I fail at this, will it be because of the business, or because of who I am, or because of what I look like, or the fact that I'm a female? I'll never know. But I mean, thus far I've found a few believers, and what I found actually is that most of the investors who have come in are kind of from the younger guard. They are, our age or younger, who get innovation, who understand the business, and maybe are more open to me. But again, who knows?
Well, with that being said, I'd like to close out this morning with maybe a word of advice from Jess and a word of advice from Natalise. What do we do to strive in order to make it?
The most meaningful advice that I could have gotten when I was younger is just to try to understand who you are and own it, and don't be apologetic for it. And I think confidence goes a long way.
What about you, Jess?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Natalise. I think that would be my foundational advice. I would say also, like, mentor down, meaning, like, instead of just seeking mentors, like, be a mentor for people around you. Like, I invest in the success of everybody that I work with, everybody who's around me. I always have time if someone wants to grab a coffee and talk. I'm always trying to give skills and opportunities, and I ask questions to the people that work under me, like, we check in and I say, hey, we're building this division or we're doing this. Like, what about your growth? What are you interested in? And I think that you build a community that way. That's, I've had business in the past where, I've had people working for me, but I've really, that would be a big pivot for me in the last couple of years is slowing down a bit and looking at the people around me and really spending some time investing in their development. And I've seen it over the years come back to me in spades since I shifted that mindset. People don't forget, they don't stay in that job forever. They don't forget that you weren't just using them as a tool to get your final objective as a leader, right? As a manager, a leader, a business owner. So I would say invest really heavily in the people around you.
Well, what a great way to wrap up this morning. I'm really appreciative to be in the company of two phenomenal women, to say the least. Really love you guys, really appreciate all of the energy and optimism that you guys are bringing. I'll say that I'm motivated, for one, to step up based on me learning what both of you guys have been through. So this is Steven signing out with Natalise and Jess. Looking forward to episode 6 next week. Wishing you guys a great morning and peace.